Hello, and welcome to this week's LCM show, where, as it turns out, we have a tale of two very vastly different movies that follow a similar trajectory, both taken out by somewhat controversial elements, and both massively underperforming despite what could at least be considered these days an okay box office opening. I am, of course, talking about Moana and Evil Dead Burn, which we will be discussing both of, as well as the overall top 10, and then finally we'll be rounding it out with what you've got to look forward to coming out this week, of course including The Odyssey. Ooh, we'll talk a little bit about the tracking for it as well. So, let's get started on Evil Dead Burn, where it seems its flame has been snuffed out. I mean, that, as you can see, it's in the green. It is in the green for a reason. It was estimated to need to make around 40 million for it to break even, so that's 20 million production budget, plus usually around 2 to 2.5 times that for the marketing, and the marketing for this film has been quite immense. So it has made its money back, but it's almost inarguably a disappointment compared to what people thought it would come in at, what it was tracking for, and just kind of disappointing for a horror movie these days, particularly after we've had such an impressive run from Backrooms and particularly Obsession, which, Obsession, by the way, is still, as you can see, in the top 10, despite being released on digital, and still only suffered roughly a 20% drop. That's really great for Obsession, and I do think this shows it's not a horror movie problem. People still want to watch horror in the cinema, but just not this one. Why? Well, let's discuss it. So, as you may have seen in my Evil Dead Burn spoiler review / breakdown, which you can watch now, there's a few things that were going against this movie. So first of all, the tracking for this movie was tracking it for 30 to 40 million domestic opening. Now there are some valid reasons behind the reason they went for this tracking, but ultimately this tracking did kind of set the movie up for failure. So the reason they mainly probably estimated it to come in at around this number is because these, as you can see, are the previous Evil Dead openings, which have that they all did at least half of what they were tracking, and I reckon the doubling of that came from the horror renaissance, you could say, that we've been experiencing as of late, particularly at the box office. Again, just look at Obsession. Obsession, Backrooms, even Passenger did make its money back, similar to this, but it was still disappointing by the horror standards. Hokum made its money back. So horror's been on a really hot streak, and I want to have a very nuanced discussion about Evil Dead's box office right now, because it isn't great. It's not great. It could have done better, and it should have done better for how horror is doing these days, but as I said, there's a few things that I do believe got in the way. So first of all, the big controversy really surrounding this film is whether or not it went too far, right? Is it too mean-spirited? Was it too gory? Was it too bleak? A lot of people think it was, even fans of the Evil Dead franchise and the reboot franchise. That's what particularly shocked me, as I mentioned in my review. You know, at this point I would have thought you would know what you're in for with these movies, and even though they do have some campy comedic elements, and I did still find them in this movie, as I said, I think it's undeniable that this movie was much harsher, much more brutal, very bleak, and for some people it just did not resonate, even horror fans. So I think that's where some of the disappointment has come in, and where it lost some of those numbers it was tracking for. Also, let's talk about the reviews. So, originally, upon its release, it was in the high 90s on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, I think everyone expected it to drop to some degree, because obviously the first few reviews that tend to come in for a movie, particularly on Rotten Tomatoes these days, are fan screenings or people who've seen the movie early and are usually quite into the movie as a result of that. So usually the first set of reviews to come out do tend to be quite positive, unless of course the movie is that bad. This again, I think there's a real mix of a controversy here, because I don't think it's a bad film, and I don't think many people believe it's a badly made film. They just have severe problems with parts of the film, right? And messages of the film and the tone of the film. So that's not necessarily meaning it's a bad movie, it just means it's a movie that's not to a lot of people's tastes, and probably a lot more people's taste than they were expecting. Then there is, again, we're not going to spoil anything from Evil Dead Burn in case you haven't seen it yet. I do recommend it, but I would say there are some very heavy trigger warnings you should be aware of going into it, including animal abuse, children being injured, and domestic abuse. Those are the three biggest trigger warnings you should have going into Evil Dead Burn. If you feel like you don't want to watch anything with that, skip it or wait till streaming, as I suggested in my review. If that doesn't sound like it's too much for you, go check it out. I do think it's worth it. But clearly, many people just felt like it just went too far. And I did sort of agree at some points in my review that some parts of the film did feel like shock value for shock value. But then again, I do think that's the type of movie it's trying to be. You know, it's interesting. So Terrifier, which I compared it to in my review, has a similar situation where a lot of people feel that Terrifier is really sensationalizing violence and is nothing more than basically the film is nothing more than a conduit to put really messed up stuff out there into the world. My argument to that, which I again mentioned, was I believe that Terrifier is more of a showcase of the practical effects from the crew, because a lot of the stuff they do is practical, and that's where a lot of people get the enjoyment from. And also, as I mentioned, Terrifier looks quite fake with its blood. It maintains that low budget aesthetic even with the higher budget in 2 and 3. Whereas Evil Dead Burn, even though I resonated with its message and I thought it did a good job of conveying its message, many people found it to be really half-hearted in it, and ultimately that didn't work, which again contributed to this feeling of this movie's too bleak, it's too depressing, and it just doesn't work for many people. So that's a really big shame, and as you can see, I do think at this point, the Evil Dead franchise do need to do something. Openings for the franchise have been a bit all over the place. 2013 opened bigger, Rise opened smaller, but ultimately still was successful. You know, it's going to be very dependent now on repeat viewings to stay even just in cinemas because of the upcoming competition, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if Evil Dead gets rushed a little bit to digital, but I wouldn't cry for Evil Dead Burn, okay? Because I love the film, but you know, I have to be objective in my reporting, and I do think it's a disappointing performance considering how horror has been doing. But I think it's important to highlight it has turned a profit. It's definitely going to be in cinemas for at least another week to 2-3 weeks, right? So it will have made money. I think Evil Dead Wrath is fine. I think they'll still make a sequel to this movie. But if I were Warner Brothers, who distribute the film, I would probably get some notes in there to try and bring together this divide between the original Evil Dead fans and the newer Evil Dead fans. Okay, let's talk about the #1 movie at the box office this weekend briefly, Moana. I have to admit, I was hoping it would be better, not only box office wise, but I was hoping that maybe it would surprise us and the reviews would be really good, and people, almost like The Little Mermaid, where a lot of people would say, oh, you have to see it to believe it, but it is actually quite good. That has not happened here. People do not like this movie, and the reason, in the beginning of this video, I made the comparison to Evil Dead's box office performance and why they're on a similar trajectory. Again, decent opening, not by franchise standards, right? Not by Disney standards, not by Disney animation standards, not by kids movie standards, really. And it's not going to make its money back. Evil Dead Burn at least has the advantage of not having a ridiculously inflated budget. Moana does not have that privilege. Moana, this live-action remake, is estimated to need to make between 500 to 625 million worldwide just to break even. I think because it's got such poor word of mouth, and because, like I've said, there's competition coming up, big competition, I think Moana has been left out to sea. As for Minions and Monsters, which as we discussed last week, did not have the best opening, it's doing okay. It's doing alright. You know, I think it's doing better than I thought it would have been based on how much pushback there was against the film from a lot of people who just weren't expecting it to essentially be a Hollywood dissection. But you know, a 44.6% in your second weekend, that's not bad, particularly for a big movie. Toy Story 5, of course, also continues to be doing really well. I don't know if it'll make $1 billion just because there is a lot of competition coming up, but then again, it's not a lot of family-oriented competition. Like, I don't think many families are going to be seeing The Odyssey. I think it'll be a lot of, well, families will see The Odyssey, obviously, but you know what I mean. It's not quite the same crowd as Toy Story 5. For Young Washington, it's okay. It's okay, you know. Angel Studios, they have this with their films, you know, they'll often come out, they make a good amount of money, then they disappear to streaming. But like I said in last week's episode, I believe they have cemented themselves as a box office presence these days, and I'm waiting for the day where they start actually holding in the top 5. I think that will be really impressive. I think it will happen. I think, for example, you know, Young Washington opened really well because it was so well positioned for July 4th weekend. So I think if they keep getting these really good position titles, but maybe trying to go after holidays with a longer celebration period, I reckon they could start to become a top 5, like, box office presence. That would be very interesting. Invite, which is of course Olivia Wilde's new movie, that went wide this week, and as you can see, people really did check it out, which I'm so happy for. I'm so happy for Olivia Wilde. I felt really bad for her throughout the whole Don't Worry Darling press tour. Like, I'm not going to comment on any of the alleged drama that happened on that set, because obviously we weren't there, we don't know. But what I can say as someone who was reading the media at the time, it did seem a little bit like a smear campaign was being launched against Olivia Wilde at the time. It was a real shame, because I actually do think Don't Worry Darling is a really great film. And of course Olivia Wilde also did Booksmart before that, which was also just incredible. Obviously we already touched on Obsession, but I mean, we'll just say it again, Big C, well done to him. I mean, look at this. It's been out on digital for 2 weeks now, and it's still in the top 10. And not just in the top 10, it's only number 8. Number 8. Dropping the 20% in what week of release is it now? 9. No. Wow. Well done. Incredible. As for Supergirl, in just its 3rd week, is nearly already out of the top 10. I mean, what a travesty for this movie, and what a shame for DC, hey? But hey, I reckon I've seen a lot of the conversation around Supergirl fizzle out quite quickly, so I reckon everyone's just hoping that we all sort of forget about this and move on, and hopefully James Gunn's next Superman film will bring life back into DC. Hopefully. We'll have to find out. I do think, as I've said many times, comic book fatigue is real. It's here. It's not going anywhere. And in order to break through it, you have to be either a very original film, or you just have to be that good of a comic book film. As for Disclosure Day, I finally did it. I bit the bullet. I kept trying to be optimistic about it. I don't think it will make its money back. It needs to make, like, nearly an extra 80 million at this point, so I just don't think it's gonna happen. Which is a shame, but again, even though it hasn't made its money back, I do think it's not a total embarrassment for Spielberg. I think he's proved he's still got an audience that will see his film, particularly because, like, Evil Dead Burn, you know, it had such a divisive reaction, Disclosure Day did. The fact that it's still in the top 10, even in its 5th week of release, I think is impressive. I think that's a good sign that perhaps if he comes back with a better film that more people like. I loved it. Again, you can check out my Disclosure Day review. I loved it, but many people did not. As for Backrooms is about ready to fall out of the top 10. This is the problem. I said either last week or the week before, I think, people are ready for Backrooms to go to digital now, and they tried to pull things back with the Everything Must Go edition, but it just didn't work. And then in particular, there's been so much confusion about its digital release date that I think some people waited out on seeing the extra edition because they thought it was going to come out last week, and it didn't. And then there's just been so many different release dates for the movie on digital that it's causing confusion in that department. I did see that Kane Parsons apparently said that he will be releasing the Everything Must Go YouTube footage on, as in the footage of that on YouTube, which that would be cool. I wonder if it's not a copyrighted thing, that might be cool to react to on the channel. That might be fun. That was the top 10. Now, let's talk about what's coming out this week for you to look forward to. Starting, of course, with theatrical releases. The big one is The Odyssey. Now, I tried to find a reliable tracking number for its box office from a reputable source today. Maybe it's not going to come out for another few days, unfortunately, but I couldn't find any, reliable tracking. There's tracking guesses from people who do have a good track record of guessing how much it will make. But overall, I would much rather, if I give you a figure, it be from a reputable source. But for the most part, all the sort of trackings I saw fell into ideally 100 million to 60. Obviously, some reports say that will be domestic, some say that will be worldwide. What do I think it will come in at? Well, this is an interesting conversation because we've just talked about two movies with controversies that have unfortunately faltered slightly because of those. And here comes another one with controversy, this time revolving many things actually. Not just casting, but historical accuracy. There's a lot of things that it seems some people really have it out for The Odyssey, and as we've seen, a hate campaign against a film can derail a film more than people realise, so that will be interesting. I think the key will simply be if The Odyssey is good. If The Odyssey is really that good of a film, I think many people with the problems will probably overlook them, right? But if The Odyssey genuinely does prove to be even, I'd say, as divisive as Tenet, I think there could be blood in the water. But Christopher Nolan is a box office juggernaut. I do not believe he will flop at all. I just can't foresee it. You never know what could happen. He could flop. It could be a tremendous disaster, but I just highly doubt it. I highly doubt it. I mean, the thing's sold out in America apparently in nearly every IMAX showing it can be. So, very impressive. I'm very excited for it. I reckon we will be looking at around 1 to 200 million of an opening worldwide. I think it will either be pretty much a direct 50-50 split of 100 on each side, domestic and worldwide, or I think one will vastly outweigh the other. I wouldn't be surprised, if Europe actually does provide more box office for The Odyssey than America, just because it is more of a European-style story, right? Interesting. That'll be an interesting thing to look at. I'll be very interested as well to see the demographics for The Odyssey. I wonder if Christopher Nolan will be able to get young people interested in history. Because, I love history. A lot of people love history, but a lot of people find it boring, right? They're like, oh, I hate it. But, this is grand history. It's fantastical history. So, there could be some stuff there. As for other theatrical releases this week, cut-off releases this week, as well as the cut-off releases this week, as well as the Animal Farm remake, and My Sassy Girl, which is a classic movie, is experiencing a re-release in cinemas, so that's fun. Other than that though, there's not overly a lot of theatrical releases that are really going to make an impact this week, other than The Odyssey. Everyone wanted to move out the way, rightfully so, of Christopher Nolan. So I think the biggest thing with The Odyssey will be how it impacts this top 10, where it falls, and I'm going to be very interested to see not only Evil Dead Burn's second weekend, but whether Obsession and Backrooms can hold on to their spots in the top 10. Backrooms, I don't know if it can. I hope it does. I would hope it hopes onto its spot, just for a little longer. But Obsession, I fully do not expect to leave the top 10, at least within the next 2 to 3 weeks. As for streaming and digital, again, not overly too much to look forward to on digital this week, but we do have some stuff, and we have some good streaming stuff. So on the 15th, on Apple TV, we have a new heist thriller called Lucky releasing. This one I'm really excited about. On the 17th, on Shudder, Exit 8 is releasing. I'll probably check that out. I haven't watched Exit 8 yet, but I've watched videos on the game, and it seems pretty creepy. I'll be interested in the film. On Netflix on the 17th, Desire, a new original thriller from Mexico, releases, as well as also on Netflix a a Korean horror fantasy series called The East Palace releases. That's on the 17th. And then on the 18th on Netflix, Spooky in Love, which is a horror comedy K-drama, releases on Netflix. So those will be interesting. I wonder how they'll do. So that was this week's LCM show. What did you watch this week? Did you see Evil Dead Burn? Do you have your tickets for the Odyssey yet? And what are you going to be watching this week? Thank you so much for watching. Please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. There's new content every week, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.